Welcome to part 3 of the CAL. To get started, we are basically going to be seaming the sleeves using the mattress stitch, the exact same technique as we did to seam the back panels together. So I'm not going to take you through how to do that. It is done exactly the same way as we did it for the back. But what I do just want to mention before we start seaming is if you are like me and you're going to be adding the collared option to your cardi, we need to mark out where exactly we want our collar to start. So to create that collar, we don't want to seam all the way to the edge here because then obviously that will all be joined and we won't have that beautiful collar to fold down. So what you want to do is take your cardi, try it on and mark how big you want your collar to be. See where you want your seams to sit on your shoulders. That's also a really important step because you don't want the shoulders to be too wide or it'll just be falling off your shoulders all the time and it won't be fun to wear. So go ahead, try it on, figure out how big you want your collar to be. And then what you're going to do is mark where you want your collar to be. So for instance, I want mine to be about this big. So I'm going to place a stitch marker in here. So then when we are seaming our sleeve, we know that once we get to this stitch marker, we need to stop seaming because that will allow for our collar to fold down. Now all we're going to do is using the mattress stitch, we're going to start from this end. So this is the sleeve end and we're going to work our way in using the mattress stitch to seam across the top here. Okay, so I have seamed across the top of my first sleeve. So this is what it should look like. You should have a nice, beautiful, neat seam across there. Now you'll be able to see here is where I stopped because that's where my collar begins. So now I've got that nice, beautiful fold down collar happening here. So now all you're going to do is go and repeat that process on the other sleeve and then come back here. We're going to start adding some length to the bottom of our sleeves. So to get started on adding the extra length to our sleeve, we again want to make sure we are going to be working on the wrong side of our cardi. So you'll see here that this is the right side facing me because we can see those V stitches. So I want to make sure that when I'm working this first row, I want to make sure I'm working along the wrong side, so this side here. I recommend when joining your yarn, wherever your seam is, so you've got your seam here across the top of your sleeve, you want to join your yarn into the underside of your sleeve. The reason for that is just in case there's any kind of visible seam that may happen. So all you're going to do is find the space between clusters on the underside of your sleeve and we're going into that space with a slip stitch and then we're just going to chain 3, which will of course count as our first double crochet, and we're then working 2 more double crochets into that same space. So we now have our first cluster and then we're just going into the next space between clusters with 3 double crochets. And we're just going to repeat that until we get to this seam here because I'm going to show you how we work past here. Okay, so here I am at the seam. Now all we're going to do, it's really easy, you're just going into that corner space there with 3 double crochets. And then just find that next corner space and we're just going in there with another 3 double crochets. So very, very easy, very straightforward, nothing too complicated here. Once you've done that, you can now move on to the next space between clusters and just continue working as normal until you get back to where you started. Once you're back here, all you're going to do is slip stitch into the top of that chain 3 to join. Then we're going to chain 3 and turn our work. So now we'll be working back along this way and we're just doing the exact same thing. So going into that first space with 2 double crochets and continuing crocheting 3 double crochets between the clusters, and you're just going to repeat that row until you have completed as many rows as you need to, either according to the written pattern or until you have reached your desired sleeve length. Once you have finished adding length to your sleeve, you're just going to slip stitch to join the round. Then we're going to leave our yarn attached and we're going to switch hook sizes. So we're going down to a 6mm. We're then going to chain 1, and you may or may not have to turn your work at this point because we just want to make sure that we're working on the outside of our cardigan. So we want the side that is going to be on the outside of our cardigan when we're wearing it to be facing us. So if you have to turn your work, please do, but if not, just continue working on that side. Now what we're going to do is we're going to be working into the tops of these stitches here, and we are going to be completing some decrease rounds. Now these rounds will probably change from size to size, so please don't copy exactly what I'm doing. Go and read the written pattern for instructions based on your size, but I'm going in with decreases all the way around. So single crocheting 2 together all the way around until I get back to the beginning. So I've just completed my last decrease of the round, and I'm now going to place a stitch marker in that last stitch, just because we're now going to be working in a spiral for the next round, so we just want to keep track of where our last stitch is. So I'm just going to go ahead now, complete all my decrease rounds, and then I will meet you back here at the beginning. So I've now finished my second decrease round. So now what I'm going to do is slip stitch into that next stitch, which is just the first stitch from the last round. And now I'm going to chain 10. We're now going to start working in rows to create the cuff at the end of our sleeve. So now what we want to do is single crochet into that second stitch from our hook. And we're then going to complete 1 single crochet in every chain all the way along. Once you're back here at the sleeve end of your row, we are going to find that next stitch, so this stitch here, and we're going in with another slip stitch, and we're then slip stitching into the next stitch as well. Then we are going to chain 1, turn our work, and we're going to continue crocheting along this strip here. Now you want to make sure that you're skipping the first 2 stitches because they're just the slip stitches we've just completed. So we don't want to crochet into there because then we'll be increasing, which we don't want to do. So skip those first 2 stitches, and then we're going in through the back loop only with a single crochet. Just like that. And we're going to repeat that all the way to the end of the row. So making sure you're just going in through that back loop because that's what's going to give us that beautiful ribbing effect. Once you get to the end, we're just going to chain 1, and again, we're turning our work. Then we're just going to repeat that row again. So going in through the back loop only and completing 1 single crochet in every stitch. Once you're at the end, we're just going to repeat what we did last time and go into that next stitch with a slip stitch, and then slip stitch into that next stitch as well. And we're just going to repeat that process until we've made it all the way around our cuff. So again, I've chained 1, turning my work, and then I'm going to start working back along this way. So I'm going to go ahead and finish off the cuff, and I will meet you back here and I'll show you how to join it together. Here I am back at my stitch marker. The stitch with the stitch marker is my last stitch, but if you have 2 stitches left on your sleeve, you want to complete another row of the single crochet. It'll look exactly the same, it just means you'll finish on this end and you'll join from this end rather than starting at this end. It doesn't matter. So I'm going to remove my stitch marker and slip stitch into that last stitch and chain 1. Then I'm going to turn my work and we're going to join our cuff together. So what you want to do is find that first stitch on the side closest to you and go in with your hook. You then want to find the corresponding stitch on the other layer, remembering that that first, well, what looks like the first stitch is actually just the slip stitch, so we don't want to go into that. We want to go into that next stitch, and then we're just slip stitching to join the two layers together, just like that. And we're just going to repeat that all the way across. So here I am at the end. I'm just going to complete my last slip stitch to finish joining. And now we can cut our yarn and we can fasten off. So you'll see here that our join pretty much looks just like the ribbing, so you really can't tell unless you're looking for it. So that completes our sleeves. Obviously you need to repeat that step on both sides. At this point I would recommend going and trying on your cardigan and deciding whether or not you want to add some extra length to the bottom. I'm not going to show you how to do that because it's done exactly the same that we added width to the front panels. So if you want to add some extra length to your cardi, you can go ahead and do that now. It is an optional step. If you're happy with your length, you don't have to do that. I am not going to be adding any length to mine because I'm happy with how it looks, but again, if you want it longer, please go ahead and add in some length. Next up, you want to turn your cardi right way out, so you want the side that's going to be on the outside when you're wearing it to be facing you. Then we're going to join our yarn in anywhere along the edge. It doesn't really matter, but I'm joining mine here, which is technically, I guess, the nape of the neck, so the top of the neck section, just so it's at the back and it's not really going to be seen. But we're just going to go in and add a row of single crochet all the way around the edge, and this will just tidy up these edges and make everything look nice and clean. So all I'm doing is joining in with a slip stitch, chain one, and then we can start single crocheting. Now obviously along these edges you're not going into actual stitches, you're just going to be working into the sides of your granny stitch. So just make sure you are spacing your stitches nice and evenly and not putting too many in, but also not putting too few in, because you don't want it to be really bunched up, but you don't want it to be really stretched out. So try and get like a nice amount of stitches in there, and keep crocheting until you get to a corner space. So a space that looks like this, and then I'll show you what we're going to do there. So you can see here that I'm now at the corner space. So all we're going to do here is, instead of going in with one single crochet, we're going to do 3, and that will just help us get around that corner, and then we can start crocheting along the next edge. And you're just going to repeat that for every corner space. Now obviously once you start working along this edge, you can just be crocheting straight into the stitches, so it's nice and easy. So just go ahead and finish off that edging and I will meet you back here. All right, so here I am back where we started. All we're going to do now is slip stitch to join, and then we can fasten off our yarn. And now would be a great time to go and sew in any ends you have remaining. I would also recommend blocking this. Now, it is an optional step, but for best results, I definitely recommend doing it. You can completely wet your cardi if you want to, and then pin it out and let it dry. Or if you're lazy like me and you have a steamer lying around, this is usually what I use. I'll just give it a quick steam and then pin it out, let it dry, and usually that does the trick. But totally up to you what method you want to use. If you don't have a steamer, you can also just use the steam option on your iron. So up to you, but I definitely recommend it just to flatten everything out and make sure it's all in shape. To create the bow for the front of your cardi, all we're going to do is start off with a slip knot, and we're just going to chain 120. Well, that's what I'm going to chain anyway. If you want it shorter or longer, by all means feel free to chain more, but I'm going with 120. Once you finish chaining, all we're then going to do is skip that first chain. We're going into the second chain from our hook with a slip stitch. And then we're just going to continue to slip stitch in every chain all the way to the end. So once you've slip stitched into every stitch, you should have something that looks like this. Now you can go ahead and fasten off your yarn, leave a little bit of a tail, we'll sew that in. I like to take the two ends and tie them together just to make sure it's nice and secure. And that is your bow done. So to attach the bow, all you want to do is count from either the bottom or the top, it doesn't matter how many spaces between clusters there are until you get to where you want your bow to be, and then obviously you want to line it up the same on the other side, and then you can just thread it through like that and tie it in a bow. Now if you wanted to attach this permanently, you could definitely put a little stitch in there to attach it, but I'm leaving mine unattached just so then I've got the option of taking it off or leaving it on. But that now concludes the Hexi Time Cardi Cal. Thank you all so much for participating in the Cal. I hope you absolutely loved it. Don't forget to share your cardis with me on socials or in the Source of Fibre Facebook community.